My guest today is filmmaker Rebecca Miller. She wrote and directed Maggie's Plan, that stars Greta Gerwig, Ethan Hawke, Bill Hader, Maya Rudolph, Travis Fimmel, and Julianne Moore. The film is based on a novel by Karen Rinaldi. Hello and welcome to San Francisco.
Hi, thank you so much.
Your new film, which is the fifth, is called Maggie's Plan, and it's a very New York film. What was Rebecca Miller's plan for making the movie?
It really evolved from my friend Karen Rinaldi's, at that time, unpublished novel. She sent me 3 chapters that were the Maggie chapters, and in those chapters were the seed of the story and the architecture, the fundamental architecture of the love triangle between Maggie, Georgette, and John, and the hook of the film. And then I showed it to my producing partner, Damon Cardasis, and then we liked the idea a lot. I brought it to Rachel Horowitz, who's a producer that I hadn't worked with, but I had known for years myself as a friend, and she loved the idea, and then began me trying to build it out, really, as a screenplay. There was a lot of plot that I had to build. I injected a couple of new characters, Tony and Felicia, and the Pickle Man. And I had long conversations with both Karen Rinaldi and also Rachel Horowitz, who's helpful in terms of sort of asking questions about structure and asking, in those first early months, trying to kind of just figure out the shape of the thing. And then it took me about a year to get the screenplay right.
So I visited your website and read your blog and saw that you worked extensively with all your actresses, Julianne Moore and Greta Gerwig.
Yes.
And you mentioned your friend Karen Rinaldi had the core of the story. I'm wondering, what was the core? Did the core have fictocritical anthropologist thrown in there?
No, fictocritical anthropology is something I injected into the film. Part of the reason is that my best friend, Barbara Browning, is a tenured professor at NYU. She's in the performance studies department, and she was sort of my little key into that world. And when I wrote the first draft of the film, she said, John sounds so much like Michael Taussig. And so I began to study Michael Taussig and really think about fictocritical anthropology, which to many people sounds like an absurd idea, but is in fact a thriving pattern of thought.
It is thriving indeed. I had to go and Google it, and I thought it was a fake thing. I'm like, wait, fictocritical anthropologist, is there such a thing? And then I started thinking, and I started thinking in a philosophical framework, because you had Greta as head of business development with an MBA degree in arts and management. So there it is, she has a business thing and she's trying to get her plan done. And here you have this postmodern experimental anthropologist. So it's the clash of two worldviews. That is the postmodern worldview where things, women take things, or human beings take control of their actions. And then here is Maggie, who has got an MBA, but also an art history degree. Was I overthinking the whole thing?
Well, I don't think... the reason I thought a lot about what Maggie's job could be. And actually, I gave Karen Rinaldi a job when we were talking. I said, you can figure out exactly what kind of degree this is and where she got it and so on. And so she did some of that research and thought about it, because I wanted her to have a degree that encompassed her giving nature, the fact that she loves to enable other people to do their best work, which is a kind of perhaps outbranch of a maternal instinct, but at the same time, her pragmatism and the fact that she's always had to take care of herself, and she was organizing the bills by the time she was 12, and she's that kind of person. So she's really one of those rare souls that artists really need, who can organize them. And that works great for her on one level, but then it becomes somewhat of a detriment, because not really wanting to use her, John sort of ends up using her a little bit, because she becomes the person who enables his life. And in a way that she becomes such a caretaker that their relationship starts to get out of balance and out of whack.
And Julianne Moore as the quirky, crazy Danish anthropologist. Was she part of Rinaldi's story, or did you create it?
That character was originally French, but she was definitely in Rinaldi's story. And in fact, she also had written a book about geishas. I think I came up with the title, Bring Back the Geisha. But I loved the idea of this woman who also succeeded in writing a pop anthropology book, which is, of course, it's a crossover, which brings her a lot of success in the world, which changes her life. And she partly writes it because of the breakup of her husband. And so it's sort of inspired by the breakup of her husband. So the idea is that the irony is that she finally gets this enormous success in the larger stage, but sort of because her life has been cracked apart, and then she realizes that perhaps she didn't take care of her marriage, and that's one of the reasons that it broke up. And so but that was there, and I kind of embellished it.
If you don't mind me saying it, she is the grown-up version of the woman in The Big Lebowski.
Oh, that's funny. I mean, I have to say, I just adore her performance in The Big Lebowski, and I'm so happy when people compare this performance to that, because, I don't know, I think we need more Maude.
I said, oh, this is what she would become. She would become a, fictocritical anthropologist after she got the baby in The Big Lebowski. So, and then the pickle entrepreneur, did you come up with that?
The pickle entrepreneur is something I added to the script. We needed a lot more complications because in Rinaldi's book, it was just a thread, a much larger novel. So when it was really just all the Maggie thread, I had to build it out a lot. And I did add the pickle entrepreneur. I did go to college with somebody who became a pickle entrepreneur, and the character is a little bit loosely based on him.
Travis Fimmel is the pickle entrepreneur. I did not know. I didn't recognize him as the Calvin Klein model.
I discovered Travis Fimmel through my husband, who had been watching Vikings, in which he's the star. And he said, you got to watch this guy. He's amazing. And I watched him, and he's so good. And then I kept saying to everybody, have you seen Vikings? And at that time, my friends mostly had not seen Vikings, strangely. And so got everybody to watch Vikings, and then had a meeting with him. Strangely, he was shooting the film 5 minutes away from where we live in Ireland, so it was very convenient. And he's just so wonderful. He brings a wonderful kind of otherworldliness almost to this character, because the idea is that he's somebody who is a little bit out of step with the world. He's a mathematician who really was a math major just because he loved math and he thought it was beautiful, not because he thought he was going to game the stock market or something. And then later he decided to become a pickle entrepreneur and is a very successful businessman in his own way. So I love the character, and I love what he did with it.
You spent a lot of time working on this story. The first half, at least the first 40 minutes, I was fascinated by your choice of words and some of the phrases you used, like pickle entrepreneur, the bill of health, and that I'm borrowing his DNA. So it was like Maggie was taking control of her plan. Who did you look to create that? Because you have mentioned in an interview that you are a people observer. You like to observe how people behave and act, and you're also interested in the family dynamics. So I was wondering, how did you come up with the dialogue for Maggie?
I just wrote the dialogue for Maggie because I felt I knew her quite well. Because I invented her, not that I invented her, of course, Karen had created a character who I changed quite a lot. I think I altered her. It's, when you start to ask how a character is created, it's a very, very tricky question. There were many things that went into the making of this character. The fact that the central hook, which is that she realizes her husband is perfect for his ex-wife and tries to get them back together, it was Karen Rinaldi's idea. And that was what the hook that we all adored and that I built out. But the elements of Maggie, the fact that, she had lost her mother early on, that she was a Quaker, the way that she uses color, the way that the apartment that she lives in, which is full of books, which is actually exactly like an apartment that I sublet, all became quite personal to me, and also was something that was created with Greta Gerwig. Greta Gerwig and I worked for an entire year coming up with this character. And so things like really fundamental things, like the fact that she's a Quaker, that was something that we came up together in her little apartment, which happens to resemble almost to a T the apartment that Maggie lives in. So it's like a magpie. You know, you take things from so many different places. I gave her things of my own. But I also gave her things that I'm not, you know, that are not like me at all. So it's kind of like it's a mishmash. And, you know, then as I said, my conversations with Rachel Horowitz were helpful sometimes, where she would ask questions and about the questions which then would make me think. But the best kind of criticism I find is less solution-oriented and more just questions. Because when people ask questions, then you're inspired to think more deeply and be more responsible for your characters. And my idea is always that every single character in the movie needs to be developed enough that you could make a whole movie about that character, no matter who they are, no matter how small of a part it is. Tony and Felicia were both characters that I injected into the film. They weren't in the book. Tony's very much based on one of my best friends. And Felicia's just one of those wonderful, guilt-free women that I just adore and want to be.
If you were to pick a character from the film, who would you want to be from Maggie's plan?
I would want to be Felicia, definitely. I would want to be Felicia.
You want to be guilt-free?
Yeah, she's just funny. She doesn't really care what people think of her. She's really out there. She's not, doesn't seem to be afraid of anything. And strangely, you know, in spite of the fact that they're always fighting and have a lot of conflict in their lives, I think that Tony and Felicia have a great marriage. I think they're very, very honest with each other, and they're not pretending to be anything that they're not. And so it's kind of nice, because you see these two people that embrace some kind of conflict and embrace the fact that sometimes they don't get along with each other and they drive each other crazy, but they're actually the ones who are going to be married in 40 years.
You mentioned that Maggie is a Quaker, and in interviews that I've read about you, you have talked quite a bit about religion starting from your childhood. Why did you make Maggie a Quaker?
It sprang out of a conversation where we talked about the fact that Maggie's unusual, partly because she's ethically driven. Even though she does all these things that people might think is not ethical, falling in love with someone else's husband, then trying to get him back together with his ex-wife, messing one thing up after another. And yet every time she does something, she believes she's doing it for the best, and she's making the best for other people in particular. So we were just thinking about this kind of purity, that weird purity that she has about her, and that and we were trying to find out, like, where's the background for a person like that? What spiritual background makes sense for that? And I went to Quaker church a couple of times, and Greta went too, and started thinking about, well, that's interesting, because it's a religion where it's very much about doing good things and the right thing for other people. So we decided on that, and there's also just something that went well with her whole style, because Maggie has a kind of modesty. She's got a lot of sensuality, but she's also got an instinctive modesty, which I think is kind of refreshing, especially now. One of the things that we talked a lot about was how the love affair with John is really the first time that she has had a fully sensual experience, like a complete falling in love, amazing sex experience, that she's been quite guarded in a way and has had less fulfilling relationships before. And so the idea, to me, it's always more interesting to watch somebody who hasn't had that kind of experience, like that love scene where he had with the big nightgown. The big nightgown was something that Greta said, I think I should have a really big nightgown. And then we started working on the nightgown, and then we talked about these buttons and the idea of the buttons, and the costume designer, Malgosia Torzanska, who's brilliant, I think, put these other buttons on that are these very sexy buttons. So these kind of details, I love having months and years to really think about something and really develop to the point where every single detail is thought through.
How do you direct? Do you have a very extensive storyboard? Do you visualize before you go in? Because in your production notes, it's been mentioned that you like to go in early and work with all the different heads of department. So I'm wondering, what is your day like on the day of shoot? Do you get up early? Do you have ritual? Because people have rituals, where they may get up early, go through their notes, and then say, okay, this is what I want to do. Do you need quiet time, or can you work in chaos?
Well, I'm pretty good at creating a bubble around myself so that I can maintain my concentration in a chaotic atmosphere. But I also rely a lot on the work that I've done before I start shooting. I'm very, very prepared, and I do a lot of drawings for the scenes, and then I have an extensive shot list. And usually I'll have a full shot list and then a second draft of the shot list, which I've worked through with the cinematographer so that can be published and given out. And even though we might divert from that or maybe have to scale back from that, every head of every department has that before we go into the day's shooting. And the fact that we made all our days has a lot to do with that preparation. Because I think if you're organized in that way and you've visited the set and you know how you like to shoot something, it just helps everybody. And you're also more able to improvise. If you suddenly see a shot in a different way, well, you're able to think on your feet. And I go in, what I do is I wake up, depending on the call, but I would wake up around 4, get up and go to the set so that I could be there an hour before, working with the DP and the AD, the first AD, and we would just look at it, talk it through, so that by the time the crew got there an hour later, they were already getting their orders. Because usually what you do is everybody gets there, the crew gets there at the same time, and then you start that process. And so everything is basically delayed by an hour, and I just couldn't afford that time. But I also really liked it because it kind of created a coalition between the 3 departments, or the 3 jobs of the AD, the cinematographer, and me, which is sometimes unusual because sometimes the AD department is actually a little bit more adversarial with the cinematographer because they're always trying to get them to do things faster and stuff. So this was an interesting kind of structure that I really loved.
Who is the audience you had in mind? Who did you make this postmodern love story set in New York for?
It's funny you mention that because I normally do not think of an audience before I start work. I really work for myself and think, well, everyone will be, I hope everyone's interested in this, and maybe they will, maybe they won't be. I think I was more aware making this film, by the time we started really getting close to shooting, that I had a feeling that a lot of people would connect to it, because I knew that these concerns, even though it's a rarefied world, and these are people talking about ideas that not everybody's talking about, their situation in life is so basic that really anybody that's starting to have relationships that's somewhat of a grown-up can connect. And in fact, I mean, the interesting thing is that very young people, like 16 and 17-year-old girls and guys, have said, I'm really connecting with this. I really see this, because they see it from the child's point of view, looking at divorce and looking at the blended families and looking at the chaos of love today, which is, the rule books have been thrown out, and we're on our own. We're inventing things as we go along. And so I guess it's a sort of a modern love story in that sense.
Is this your ode to New York and our modern life?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a love story with New York and an ode to New York. And it is also about being a female now, being a person now. What are men and women to each other now that we don't necessarily need each other economically or even to procreate? What is that? It's choice. And that's more exciting, but also more confusing.
Rebecca, thank you so much for talking to us. Wish we had more time. We wish you all the best with your film.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.